We started last week talking about a mature approach to communication, and we focused on a contradiction, or if you will, a challenge that exists in human communication. The challenge is Ein Adam Yodea Ma Belibo Shel Chavero. That means that we can never fully communicate with anyone. That means that we can never know whether we are making ourselves clear to the other person, and we can never know what the other person really is meaning to say to us. So we are always operating in the world of the unknown when it comes to communication. So you would think that that would almost end the whole story. Then what possible communication could there be? And the answer comes from another Chazal. The Chazal say, Ein lidayon elamasha einov roos. That we have to function. We need to be able to function. And to be able to function means trying to be appropriate, trying to make ourselves as available to the other as we can, trying to understand as best as we can what the other is trying to communicate to us, but always keeping a certain humility. Since we know that we can't do it fully, there's a certain humility that allows us to self-correct when we realize that the other person didn't mean. I can't help but tell this little story, one of my favorites. There was a boy who came home to his mother and said, Mommy, where do I come from? So Mommy's been kind of ready for this to happen at some point. And so she's ready with her answer. And she says, Billy, go ask your dad. So Billy goes inside and says, Dad, Mom says I should ask you where I come from. So Dad understands that this is his moment to be dad. And he takes the remote, shuts off the television, puts down his beer. Billy, sit down. And he explains from A to Z, from Aleph till Taf. He explains to Billy how a child comes into the world. And when he's all done, he turns to Billy and he says, Billy, now do you understand where you came from? He says, yeah, Dad, that was amazing. Because Jimmy in class says he comes from Cleveland. So the idea of assuming that you know what the other person is asking, what the other person is looking for, without the humility of checking. You give a half an answer, you give a little bit of information, and you're always in a humble state of checking, is a way of avoiding being silly and saying and doing things that really, it was not what the other person was looking for. And so we talked about communication on the basis of Ein Adam Yodea Ma Belibo Shel Chavero and Kishem Partzufeim Shomnos Kach Deoseim Shomnos. The fact that people are unique, no two people are the same, which means that they don't have the same perspective on the world or even on the same words that you were using. On the other hand, there is Ein L'dayin Elamasha Ein Avroas. I have to function in the world. And functioning in the world means that I do the best that I can, but I do so with a certain humility. This week, I want to add an important exception to this rule. And that exception comes from the Pasuk in Mishlei, where Shlomo HaMelech tells us, Kemayim haponim laponim, kein leiv ha'adam la'adam. That just as when you look in water, water will reflect your image, You're looking down into the water, and the water will reflect, and you'll see yourself. The same is true with regard to the hearts of another person. What that means, and this is, by the way, a fascinating chazal about this that has to do with, it's a little bit complicated, about prika and te'ina, about the laws of helping someone whose animal is in trouble. In one case, the animal needs to be loaded up and it's not being loaded up properly, so you have to help the owner load up the animal. And in the other case, the animal is overloaded and it's collapsing under the weight. And that's called the mitzvah of prika. And the mitzvah of prika always has precedence over the mitzvah of te'ina, because prika is stepping in when the animal is suffering. So when the animal is suffering, there's tsar balei chayim. But it has to, there's a twist. The twist is that if you have a sone, so somebody you don't like, so you override the priorities and you help him out, even though what he needs is help with te'ina. And the words that the Gemara uses is you have to help him out kedei lachuf es yitzra, in order to bind your yetzer, so that your yetzer is not getting the best of you. And the explanation that Tosfos gives for what is this idea of binding your yetzer, the idea is that the idea of binding your yetzer is that you, because of this pasuk of kemayim hapanim lapanim kein leiv ha'adam la'adam, if you come over to him with negative feelings in your heart, even though you don't say a single negative word, but you approach him with your negative feelings, then he will pick that up. And because of this rule that hearts reflect, he will end up feeling negative feelings towards you. And in the case that the Gemara is talking about, it is where I have not only permission, but a mitzvah to have negative feelings towards him because of certain averos that he did not do tshuva for. But he doesn't have any permission to hate me. So by coming over to him with negative feelings, I am actually violating the rule of lifnei iver. I am causing him to have negative feelings towards me. Now, what a fascinating thing. There was no discussion going on. And what about ein adam yodea ma belibo shel chavero, and everybody is different, kishem shepartzufeim shonos. However, that all applies to thoughts. But what goes on in your heart transmits perfectly. Now, using the word perfectly, we have to be a little bit careful. I go over to him with love. That doesn't mean that he's going to love me. It's likely, it's possible, but if he's a paranoid person who doesn't know how to receive love, it may not be so successful. So therefore, we have this intricate system. On the one hand, we are always operating in the unknown. On the other hand, when we know our feelings towards the other, then we can proceed with certainty, with confidence that what we are transmitting is love. What we are transmitting is positive feelings. And by the way, a lot of people think that they love other people, but it's not all that complete. Maybe it's 90%, which is great, but it's 10% self-serving. And as a result, you get a complex story where the other person doesn't know what to trust. Should they trust their feeling of safety, which is coming from the 90%? Or should they trust their feeling that, not altogether my ally here? And this complexity adds a layer to what happens when two people interact with each other. Kemayim hapanim lapanim, kein leiv ha'adam la'adam. We interact with our hearts. Our hearts are way more accurate than our thoughts are, or than our speech is. Our thoughts are, our hearts communicate extremely well, but they're a little honest. The hearts are a little honest. And sometimes the other person assumes that we love them when there's really part of it that's self-serving, that's manipulation, that isn't really in their interest. And so we've added another wrinkle this week. We started with the complexity of not being able to know what is in another person's mind or their perspective, how they're understanding us, how we're understanding them. And we always have to proceed with a certain humility that we're trying to understand, but we don't necessarily fully understand. And we're adding in that there's a different language system that goes on when it comes to feelings. That language system is not about trying to communicate. That language system is about being honest, because hearts communicate. And when hearts communicate, they do so with a tremendous honesty, with the honesty of water reflecting an image.